Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Lecture number 25, 10th class, unit number 5, subprograms and file handling. In our previous lecture, we had started about file handling, in which we had studied about some of the characters, data fields, and record program files and data files. Today, we are going to study about opening a file. What is the syntax to open a file and how we can use this syntax and command. When creating or accessing a sequential file, the first thing the programmer must do is open the file using the open statement. The open statement has the following form: open filename.ext for mode as #sign buffer. The open statement will provide the name of the file, the way in which it will be used, mode, and the buffer number of the file. The same rules apply for naming data files as they do for naming regular basic programs file, except the data file should normally be given an extension .ext of .dat, whereas a program file is given an extension of .bas. So students, remember that there are two extensions that we have to use. That .ext is used for data file, where .bas is used for program file. This could mean that the program using the data file could have the same name as the data file. The program using the data file could have the same name as the data file. It means to say the data file and the program file can have the same name but with different extensions. The extension would be the only way to distinguish the files from each other. This is the customary things to do when naming program and data files that will only be associated with each other. You can use a file as either output, input, or append. These are the mode options. Output means that the program will eventually write data to the file. Input means that the data contained in the file will eventually be read into the calling program. Append means that the data will be added to the end of an existing file on disk. Like append is like you are recording something and you have closed the file and you want to edit that file to and extend it, then that you will use the append statement. A buffer is a reserved section of primary storage used for storing temporary data being written to or read from a file. The programmer specifies the buffer number of a file, and it is used by the program to recognize and identify the file that is attempting to be manipulated. The buffer number of the file must be known by the programmer when attempting to write data to or read data from the file. If you try to open a file that doesn't exist, a new file will be created. If you try to open a pre-existing file as output, the file will be overwritten and will lose all its contents or data. For example, consider the following open statement: open stdata.dat close for output as #1. The above open statement open the file stdata.dat for output using 1 hash as a buffer number. If stdata.dat pre-existed on disk, then it will be overwritten and created as an empty file. Once you have successfully opened a file, you can either write data to it, read data from it, or append record to the file. This depends on what mode you specified for the file in the open statement. Hope you have understood how to open a file. Next is writing a file. Writing to a file that has been previously opened in output mode is accomplished using the write statement. The write statement works much like the print statement, except instead of sending output to the screen, the write hash statement will send data to the opened file. Another difference is that when using the write hash statement, you must first indicate the buffer number of the file being written to. For example, consider the following write hash statement. Write hash 1 name, address, phone. The above statement would write the data contained in the name, address and phone variable to the file using buffer number 1. The write hash statement actually only transfers the data into buffer one's primary storage location. The transfer from primary memory to secondary memory actually occurs when closing the file, which is covered further in the article. As you has opened a file, now you want to write something that is permanently stored in that data file. So you will use this syntax write hash 1. At that you will type the data that you want to store it. Like this one, write hash 1 name, address and phone, and it will be stored into the data file. Next is reading from a file. Reading data from a file that has been previously opened as input is accomplished using the input hash statement. The input hash statement is similar to the input statement, except instead of reading user data input from the keyboard, the input hash statement reads data input from a file on disk. For example, consider the following. Input hash 1 stu name, GPA, grade. So you have already stored the data in the data file and you want to read it. The input statement will be used to read the data, and output statement or write statement will use to write the data in the data file. The above statement would take values associated with the file with buffer number 1 and assign the value to each of the specified variables in the statement, one value at a time. It is important to note that the input number statement reads data from the record that is currently being pointed to by the file position pointer. After the input number statement is executed, the file position pointer will be incremented to the next record in the file, and then the process is repeated if trying to read more data in the file. So when you have used this statement, it will read the data stu name, GPA and grade from the file and let you understand it. It will read continuously until the data is relevant to this statement. It is also important to realize that there is an end of file EOF character at the end of every file. This allows the program accessing the file to recognize when there is no more data left in the file. The end of file character comes in handy when reading data from a file because it will let you know when all data has been read. The function EOF that is used to check for the end of a file during the reading process. The EOF function will return a value false if there are more records in the file, or it will return a value true if the end of the file has been encountered. Therefore, the EOF function is actually evaluated like a Boolean expression. Boolean expression is like true or false. The argument sent into the EOF function will be the buffer number of the file being manipulated, because the EOF is a Boolean expression that returns the value of true or false. It is an efficient way of controlling the execution of a loop during reading data from file. For example, consider while not EOF 1 input hash stu name, GPA, grade, print student stu name semicolon space 5 GPA space 5 grade. While the above code would read all data and records contained in the file with buffer number 1 and print the data for each record until the end of file marker is reached. If you want to access and point data sequentially, access and print data contained in a particular record in a file, you would have to read in but not print all records preceding the target record. This can be accomplished by creating a dummy variable to keep track of how many records have been read from the file until the record you are trying to access is the next record to be read. This is consuming. You reach to desired record in efficient, and a better solution to this problem would be a would use would be use a random access method file. We dive into the details of random access later. This program will continue the execution until you reach at the end of file. If you reach at the end of file, the program will be terminated, and if you do not, it continues the execution. But this is a very time consuming process because it takes many much time. It reads all the lines of code and the files that comes in its ways. That's why we recommend that we have to use the random access method to access any file. Let's wind up our today's lecture. Regarding to today's lecture or previous lectures, if you have any issue or query, leave a question in the group. I will guide you in the group. Do remember one thing: you have to practice your problems on your own. If you do not able to solve that problem, let me know. I will guide you. I will catch you in next lecture. Till that lecture, take care yourself. Allah Hafiz.